The so-called mental health of your children is being deliberately destroyed, and then once it's destroyed, once your kids are desperate, depressed, and even suicidal, they're going to take their calls to the suicide hotline and further radicalize them with gender ideology and worse. Don't believe me? Stay tuned. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Behind the Deep State. I'm your host, Alex Newman, for the New American Magazine. Thank you for tuning in. Folks, we have a crisis in our schools, and I know that word gets really overused, but this is an actual crisis. It is a crisis in the minds and the hearts and the souls of our children. And, you can't trust the CDC for anything. They're absolutely useless. They're liars, and they should not be considered credible. But I want to share with you some recent data they put out and explain to you why this is so important and how they're weaponizing this to further harm our children. It really is just absolutely terrible. And so the CDC put out data last month because they're using the youth risk behavior surveys. This is what they give out in government schools. They said that almost 60% of teen girls in this country, in government schools, almost 6 in 10 felt persistently sad or hopeless in 2021. About 1 in 3 of those girls seriously considered suicide in 2021. It's up 60% from a decade ago. More than 1 in 10 girls actually reported attempting suicide in 2021. That's a surge of 30% from 2011 when they started doing these surveys. So there is a crisis going on. Our young girls are depressed. They're feeling hopeless. They many of them are turning to suicide and other very harmful behaviors, whether it be chopping off body parts, trying to impersonate men, taking drugs, becoming promiscuous, whatever it is. And the same thing is happening with boys. It's just not quite as extreme, but the data on boys is really, really bad as well. It's especially bad for so-called LGBT students. And you know what? We know that this is a real thing. Earlier this year, I wrote an article about a new study that came out from the National Bureau of Economic Research, and really this just confirmed the findings of an earlier study, one from 2018 at Vanderbilt University, that shows that there's a really strong correlation between children going to school and children killing themselves. The correlation is really, really strong. What they found through their research is that kids stop killing themselves when they're not in school for the summer or whatever, and then once they go back to school, they start killing themselves again. And you can see this very clearly because in places where the kids go back to school in August, they start killing themselves in August. Where kids don't go back to school till September, they start killing themselves in September. And so really, really terrible numbers. The study's called In-Person Schooling and Youth Suicide, Evidence from School Calendars and Pandemic School Closures. What they found is that when schools reopened after the COVID, there was an increase in suicides of between 12 and 18%, depending on where you're looking at. So in other words, schools are killing far more children than COVID ever did. So we've got this crisis. Again, and this came out in a similar study from Vanderbilt University in 2018. It was published in the journal Pediatrics. And what they found was that kids stop killing themselves when they're out of school. They start killing themselves when they are back in school. Now, the authors have these different ideas about why they're doing this. Maybe that's because they don't feel comfortable in school. I think most of these reasons are silly. I think the real reason is obvious. They're being told that there is no meaning to life. There is no God. There is no morals. Just do what you want. It'll be fun. Your life has no more meaning than the life of your goldfish or your cat, right? So what happens is they're destroying these kids mentally. They're destroying these kids emotionally. They're destroying these kids spiritually. And then they're giving them little phone numbers. They say, oh, do you feel suicidal? Call up your National Suicide Hotline. And so you call the National Suicide Hotline, and what happens? Right away. What gender are you? Are you two-spirit or gender queer or agender or gender nonconforming or third gender or gender not listed here, right? This is the things that they're asking these children when they call into the suicide hotline. And what happens if they say anything other than they're a boy or a girl? They're transferred over to a resource called the Trevor Project. Folks, this is a very dangerous and a very evil operation that you need to know about. I want to share with you a little bit about this Trevor Project, folks, because, again, huge numbers of children, when they call these national suicide hotlines, when they have a mental health problem, they get referred to this Trevor Project. And I was actually made aware of all this by Brenda Lebsack. She's a former school board member in California. She's been a teacher for decades, a wonderful lady, and she's working really hard to try to protect children in the public schools. And so she made me aware of all this stuff, and I started looking at the documents. I could not believe it, and yet there it was, right? So you get online to the Trevor Project, and she she actually did this. She infiltrated. And what she found out is right away they're affirming whatever delusion you have. She actually pretended to be a vampire cat. She said she identifies as a vampire cat. And of course, the Trevor Project affirmed her identity as a vampire cat. Now, once you get into Trevor space, which is part of the Trevor Project, you're then invited to join all these communities. You can join communities like furries, right? And we've talked a little bit about furries. These are kids who identify as animals, and they come to school wearing critter costumes, and they meow, and they like to pee in litter boxes. And you think I'm kidding. I'm not. There are hundreds of thousands of these so-called furries across America. They've got another one for adults who identify as babies. They call it regressors. They've got a witchcraft club. They've got a gay men club. And their tagline, I'm not kidding, is "Let's talk about boys." Yeah. Pretty creepy. Okay, how about why don't you not talk about boys? That's crazy. Why are you sending children to a place where they're going to join a thing called Gay Men Club that's going to have a tagline called "Let's talk about boys"? But so that's what's happening, folks. And this is a grooming organization, according to Dr. James Lindsay. He's a leading secular critic of what's been happening to the children. He actually calls this the Groomer Project, posing as suicide prevention. And he warned that something really bad was going on here. Now, to give you some sense of how bad these things are, one of the key executives of this group was actually Sam Brinton. He's the one famous for his gender-bending weirdo sexual fetishes. He likes to walk other men around as dogs on leashes so they could be his sex slaves. He does this in public. Of course, you probably remember he was recently arrested on felony charges in Minnesota. But he was a high-ranking official in the Biden administration. He was like an assistant deputy secretary at the Department of Energy, something like that. And he was actually a major force in this Trevor Project. He helped draft the model school district policy on suicide prevention. Can you imagine letting this guy draft the model policy on suicide prevention? Well, it's not even about suicide prevention. It's about injecting woke craziness into the schools. And so this model school district policy on suicide prevention, he worked with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the American School Counselor Association, the National Association of School Psychologists, and what they do is they normalize these very, very bizarre behaviors. So you call in because you feel sad. They send you to a Trevor Project where you can join a group for furries or for gay men whose tagline is "Let's talk about boys," and then they affirm whatever gender delusions you have. If you think you're a vampire cat, then good, you're a vampire cat. And folks, this is happening not just in California. This is in Texas. This is all over the country. And I want to give you an example of what this looks like, okay? We actually interviewed a lady on this program some time ago. She's a mom in Northern California. Her name is Erin Lee, and she had a 12-year-old daughter. She has a 12-year-old daughter, and her daughter was kept after school for an art club. Right? She texted her mom, "Mom, can I stay after school for the art club?" "Sure, honey." So she stayed after school for an art club. Come to find out, it wasn't actually an art club. It was a Genders and Sexuality Alliance art club. They told this little girl that if she wasn't fully comfortable in her own body, she was probably transgender. If she wasn't sexually attracted to boys, she was probably queer. But she couldn't talk to her parents about these things because her parents were not a safe space. So being a good little girl, she went home and she told her parents, she told her mom right away what happened, and her parents withdrew her from the school. Well, and you might have heard that interview. If you haven't, you can go listen. Horrific what happened. And so they actually pulled their daughter out of school. They put her in a Christian school. And the school, we've got the emails. This mom actually got Freedom of Information, got the emails from the school. They were talking about sending the CPS, the Child Welfare Services, into the home to investigate because this family wasn't affirming of these alleged gender delusions, this idea that the girl was actually transgender. So that became a big scandal. She ended up getting onto Tucker Carlson, on Glenn Beck, right? She became a national sensation, a national scandal surrounding this school district in northern Colorado, the Poudre School District. And so she contacts me again, and you almost can't believe this, but it's true. The school had kind of backed down. They said they got rid of this lady who had groomed the girl, Kimberly Chambers, that had told her she was transgender and had handed out her phone number and stuff. Well, the lady who, at last I looked, was running now these LGBT things, the GSA clubs, giving speeches to students, doing professional development for the teachers and the staff, she calls herself, her pronouns are like they, them. She was a girl who now I think describes herself as one of these, new gender categories. I don't want to get it wrong. But I spent just a few minutes looking on her social media profiles, and she is a self-proclaimed witch. She likes to do rituals involving blood. She, you can see the picture. She writes things in blood, blood rituals, she calls them. She's a specialist on polyamorous relationships. She reads tarot cards. She actually teaches witchcraft and magical activism, according to her own website. She actually advertises her services as a witch. And so, folks, the way she gets into the school, her actual title, believe it or not, is working with the Alliance for Suicide Prevention. She's not actually an official employee of the school district. She's the LGBTQ coordinator for the Alliance for Suicide Prevention for the county government, for Larimer County. So LGBT coordinator for the Alliance for Suicide Prevention. So she is the one who's dealing with the kids who are becoming suicidal as they're brainwashed and made to believe that they might have been born in the wrong body and that they need to transition, that they need new drugs, that they need to be castrated, that they need genital mutilation, or that they need to remove their breast. Folks, this is so wicked. I don't even know what to say about it. And yet this is what is happening. And it gets crazier. You probably can't believe that it gets crazier, but it actually gets crazier. So this Trevor Project that I mentioned to you, last year, they did something really, really interesting. They actually chose a guy called Lil Nas X to be the Suicide Prevention Advocate of the Year, along with his song, Call Me By Your Name. We're not going to show too much of this video because it's disgusting. It is so grotesque. I don't feel like anybody should be exposed to that. But one of the things that is included in there is, this guy, Lil Nas X, being sexually intimate with Satan. Okay, he's using cocaine. He's got children, sex with elite and children in this lyrics. So, folks, this is the guy that Trevor Project, which is where the suicide hotline, federally funded, by the way, is sending your children. They thought it'd be good to give a Satanist who promotes cocaine use and sexually intimate relationships with Satan the award as Suicide Prevention Advocate of the Year. What do you do with that? What do you do with that, folks? This comes from the pit of hell, and I don't know how else to say it in a nice way. This Trevor Project, they're mixing adults and kids. They're promoting a Satanist. They're encouraging conversations between adults who may be pedophiles, predators, with children who are lonely, who are confused. They're actually telling these children that it's okay to share their cell phone numbers in this thing. And all this is brought to you, again, by your federal tax dollars, folks. This is diabolical. This is a deep state plot, not just to hurt your children. Right? So first they scramble their brains. They make them feel meaningless. They make them despair. They make them depressed. Then they want to give them drugs to hand out money to the big pharmaceutical companies. Then they want to get them in these suicide prevention programs that are going to encourage the types of things that we have talked about today, folks. So it's very sad. And it is very dangerous. And I cannot urge you in stronger terms to protect your children from this. They want you to think, they want Americans to think that they're going to protect your children from you, right? And Joe Biden is laying the groundwork for this right now. They are laying the groundwork for legal groundwork for government to intervene in a family if the family doesn't affirm the gender delusions of the child, the sexual proclivities of the child. They want to say that kids might become suicidal if their parents don't affirm that. And so then the government's going to come in and protect those children from you, mom and dad. And then they're going to run them to places like Trevor Space, where they'll hear from Lil Nas X, where they'll learn about furries, and where they'll join gay men clubs with taglines like, "Let's talk about boys." This is evil, folks. It is absolutely evil. And if you don't protect your children from it, nobody is going to protect them. This is the deep state in all its glory, right? This is the deep state naked. This is ultimately what it's all about, folks. And I've been saying this for years. You cannot understand what we're involved with here unless you understand that there is a metaphysical component to this. It's not just bad guys with bad ideas. It's not just a stupid ideology. It's evil that we're dealing with. And if these types of things being done to children doesn't convince you of that, I don't know that anything will. I'm Alex Newman. This is Behind the Deep State. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you'll share this information out with others. Call your legislators. Right? This is happening in your state. This is happening in your community. This is happening in your school district. Get on the phone with your school board right now and ask them about this. Ask them about their suicide prevention programs. Ask them about their LGBT programs. Ask them about their relationship with Trevor Space and Trevor Project. Okay? Kids are being destroyed, folks. Kids are killing themselves in huge numbers. And the solution is not to further radicalize them, further confuse them with this evil. It's to tell them the truth, that they're made in the image of God, that God loves them, that there is a meaning to life, right? Beyond just more sex, beyond just, what you feel like today, what gender you want. It's not all about you, right? And as long as kids don't realize that it's not all about them, that they're not God, that there is something outside of themselves, that life is worth living, that life has meaning, this crisis is going to get worse. You don't think 60% of our young girls being in despair is bad enough? Just wait, right? It will get worse if we don't do something about this. Thanks again for watching. Till next time, God bless you all.
All right, parents, listen up. We've all seen the countless examples of how radical leftists have been destroying American schools. It's no longer just about the terrible math and reading levels. Now, radical left teachers birthed from liberal universities are forcing gender indoctrination in kindergarten. They're teaching lessons on white guilt.
Freedom Project Academy has perfected live online learning over the course of a decade. I get a ton of great feedback about this program, a ton.
They're built on Judeo-Christian values, a classical curriculum. What does that mean? It means they're taught, your children are taught the way that the founding generations of the country. My own son Noah did Freedom Project Academy for several years when he was younger.
The more we tell our friends about these things, the more people will get on board, and I believe that we can be the catalyst to some real change.
We must save the West. Our way of life and our culture is under attack, and because of patriots like you and your project, I have optimism for the future.